Boards of health have the authority to enact reasonable health regulations, and the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts has consistently upheld the Board of Health authority to enact and enforce regulations, the most recent decision being in 2011, where the Board of Health in Boston was sued for prohibiting blunt wraps, and the SJC upheld the regulation as a reasonable regulation. However, I would just like to underscore that just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you should. Any regulation that you enact will probably be upheld as reasonable. However, some regulations make more sense than others. For instance, a regulation that would restrict the sale of nicotine delivery devices, for instance, electronic cigarettes, to minors would be a reasonable health regulation that a Board of Health could enact and could enforce. Boards of Health do compliance checks and do other checks on sales of cigarettes to minors, so this would just be an extension of that kind of a regulation. Right now, non-FDA approved nicotine delivery devices are not age restricted. That would be one kind of regulation. Consider another kind of regulation, which again would be a reasonable public health regulation that would prohibit adults from using cell phones. Right now, of course, there's a state law that prohibits minors from using cell phones, but a reasonable health regulation would be one that also prohibited adults from using these devices. However, how would a Board of Health actually enforce this kind of a regulation? With the state law that prohibits minors from using cell phones, it's enforced by the police. I would suggest that a Board of Health regulation that would prohibit adults from using cell phones, while reasonable based upon public health issues, would not be something that a board should be considering, because it would exactly be the kind of regulation that would be incredibly challenging for a Board of Health to enforce. I don't think I know any health inspector that would have the wherewithal or the resources to actually stop an adult that was driving and using a cell phone. So in a nutshell, just because you have the legal authority as a Board of Health does not necessarily mean that you should pass any and all policies that you think would be good for public health unless they were something that you knew you could enforce and that you felt would be a reasonable regulation for your city or town.